What's up, guys? Tyler here, bringing you another video. Tonight, I had a message completely planned, ready to go, and then God said, no, we're going to do a different message. We're going to talk about a different subject. So, here it is. I was going to talk on Ephesians 6, talk about that this weekend, I guess. But today, I want to talk to you about a verse found in Genesis. And with that, I want to just start off by asking you if you've ever felt like God has left you. Have you ever felt like God has forgotten you, or do you feel like God has given up on you? Because if you felt this way, or if you do currently, you're not alone. Because so often the enemy tries to convince us of this. And biblically, we know it's incorrect. We know that God says that he'll never leave us, but the devil is deceptive. And he's going to do all he can to take God's people out of the fight. He wants to convince us that we're alone. He wants us to fail. He wants you to fail. But God just wants you to feel. The enemy is shouting at the top of his lungs. But whenever it comes to God, it seems like every single time he's speaking in a whisper. So why is that? Why is it that the enemy shouts, but God whispers? Why do I hear the enemy and I don't hear God? Consider this. The ones that have the most to prove are usually the loudest. You look at protests on TV, and the people that are yelling at the ones that are trying to calm the other person down and speak logic, the ones that are yelling are the ones that are wrong. They know they're wrong, but they don't have an argument, and so their argument is yelling. So is Satan's. His argument against you is yelling, because he wants to prove to you that you're far from God, but he can't prove that because you're not far from God. But he's going to yell at you constantly and throw things your way constantly to overwhelm you and make you feel as if you actually are far from God. He wants you to feel that way. For about 3 months, I went through a season of feeling far from God. And it was a terrible one, I'll be honest. I hated it as I went through it, but now I'm so grateful for it. But I mean, I just got out of it like a little over a month ago. I allowed the enemy to sneak in, and little by little, one thing after another, he just began to overwhelm me until I was constantly overwhelmed. My anxiety got worse. My routines of reading the Bible and listening to worship became almost non-existent. I lost almost all discernment. I started doing things that, well, not doing really bad things, not like falling into my past life, my former life, but just starting to question things that God has promised over me. But I recognize now, of course, that his promises are still true, and that every single one of his promises will come to pass. But I didn't want to be in that season. I didn't want to be running from God, but I also felt like I couldn't be running to God. I felt like Jonah. Felt lost. The best word to explain how I felt was alone. I've never felt so alone in that season, and I was so overwhelmed constantly that I did feel alone. I felt far from God, and I kept begging God to show up. The entire time I was begging God to show up. But you want to know what I wasn't doing? I wasn't telling Satan to shut up. Satan wants you to give up on God, but the crazy thing is that we actually believe him when he says that God is far from us. He's yelling at us, telling us this, and we're allowing him to speak into our lives. We need to be telling him to shut up. And I know the Bible, I know it's saying, that God's never going to leave me, but the enemy over here is telling me otherwise. He's shouting at me constantly, and I'm starting to feel that way, and that's when you need to tell him to shut up. because we recognize that the enemy is a liar, but we still choose to believe him. Why do we do that? We choose to believe him because we're intimidated by him. 1 Peter 5:8 says that the enemy prowls around like a roaring lion. He prowls around like a roaring lion. And I don't know anyone that wouldn't be intimidated by a 400-pound lion with claws and teeth like that. But Pastor Stephen Furtick from Elevation said just last week that notice how the scripture says like. And I had to share this with you guys because there's so much power in this right here. But the scripture in 1 Peter 5:8 says he prowls around like a roaring lion. He's looking for prey like a lion, but he's not a lion. He's loud like a lion, but he's not a lion. He's yelling, he's loud, he's shouting, he's roaring like a lion. But Satan is not a lion. You need to understand this. A lion is bigger than me, but he's not bigger than me. I've got the strength to defeat him and all of his friends because Christ gives me strength. Christ has always given me strength. But maybe right now I just don't feel like Christ is with me. I don't feel like the one who gives me strength is right there with me. I feel weak and I feel exhausted, and the one who gives me strength is nowhere to be found. He's nowhere. And when this happens, there's nothing you can do but rest. You're exhausted. You need the sleep. And in Genesis 28, we pick up with a story of Jacob, and we see that he's just set out on a journey, and he's gone a ways now, and he's tired. Genesis 28:10 says, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. That's not a very good pillow, but he was tired. And this kind of gives us an idea of how tired he was. It says he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the east and to the west, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. What God says next is what you need to hear, what you need to focus on, and that is verse 15, and it says, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I've done what I have promised you. What does God promise us? He promised us to bring the work that he's began in us to completion at the day of his return. God is saying that he's never going to leave us. He says right there in the verse, I'm with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will not leave you. He says later on too that I will never leave you or forsake you. And in verse 16, Jacob recognizes this truth. He says, when Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. God is still with you. He never left. He's telling you that he's still with you. He's whispering it. He's trying to come to you when you're resting, when you're at peace. He came to Jacob when he was sleeping. The enemy is coming at you all throughout the day, trying to get your attention, trying to get to you. But when you go down to sleep, he can't get to you. And that's whenever you can listen and hear for God's voice. And so maybe in your overwhelming life, whenever you're freaking out, whenever you're trying to figure things out on your own, you just need to take a breath. You need to sit down. You need to rest. Maybe you need to take a nap. Maybe you just need to go and shut off your phone. Because that thing is the biggest distraction. That's how Satan's going to try his best to get to you. Because porn has never been as accessible as it is now. You get on Instagram and there it is. Same for drugs. You go on Snapchat or Instagram and everybody's stories is them smoking pot. And that's how Satan's trying to get to you and influence you, because he wants to intimidate you into doing those things. He wants you to give in to lust. He wants you to give in to your temptations to do drugs. But God is just saying, hey, like, calm down, sit down, rest in my presence, turn your phone off for a little bit, turn it off for a day. Maybe you need to fast and just seek God for a day. And God will make himself evident if you decide to actually rest in his presence. Maybe you just need to listen to worship. A song that has recently really touched my heart is Here Again by Elevation Worship. They've sang it before and I've heard it at their location, but they just released it recently on Spotify and iTunes and stuff as a single. But in the song, the chorus is just a plea for God to meet us here again. It says, I am not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? Because all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? But the bridge is where the revelation comes, because right now we're pleading for God to meet us here again. But the bridge says, not for a minute was I forsaken. The Lord is in this place. We're begging for God to come back, but God never left us. If you feel far from God, it's because you're walking away. Jonah tried running away from God, and God said, I'm right here still. You're just trying to put distance between us. But you know that as soon as you put distance between us, you're going to start missing us, missing this relationship. And like the lost son in Luke 15, where he runs away from his father and he ends up blowing out everything because he doesn't have that guidance anymore. And he ends up on a pig farm, and he thinks, if only I can go work for my dad and maybe he'll let me eat with the slaves. And that's how we feel about God, is we feel ashamed of ourselves for running away. But as soon as the lost son goes running back or walking back to his father, his father comes running to him and embracing him. And that's how God is with you. You're running away, but as soon as you just take that time to walk back to him, to slowly enter back into his presence, to just rest there, God is embracing you, and he's ready to take you back in with so much joy and so much love. Not for a minute was I forsaken. God has been here the whole time. He's never left you. He never will. The Father was still waiting at home for his son. It just took the time for his son to go back, and the Lord is in this place. I said earlier, this isn't in my notes, but I said earlier that God is nowhere to be found. And if you really look at that, nowhere to be found, it feels like he is in your time. But I have one story to share with you, and then I'll end this video. I know it's been a long one, but there's a story, and I just recently heard about this, of an atheist man that was teaching his daughter to read. She was just learning how to read and even write, and he decided to write, God is nowhere, on a piece of paper, because he wanted her to say that and to recognize that from a young age and to grow up not believing in God. But she looked at that paper, and she began to spell it out in her head and to sound it out. God is Nowhere. God is now here. It's not that God is nowhere, it's God is now here. He's with you. He's always been with you. And you just need to look at that, take that revelation in, recognize that God is now here. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate every single one of you. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like. Don't forget to share it with a friend or post about it somewhere, whatever. Thank you so much for all the support. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I release new videos twice a week, usually Tuesdays and Saturdays, unless something serious comes up. And speaking of which, I will have a new one out Saturday. So see you guys then. God bless.